Billy Crystal finally tells the truth about Robin Williams at the age of 77. The world lost not only a brilliant comedian, but also a guy whose remarkable talents were entwined with equally significant challenges when Robin Williams committed suicide in August 2014. A much smaller circle lamented the private person they had truly known, while millions lamented the public persona, the quick-wittedness, the stunning impressions, and the seemingly limitless vitality. Perhaps no one in this close circle knew the true Robin Williams, his genius and his suffering, better than his lifelong friend, Billy Crystal. These two comedic icons had a relationship for more than 30 years that went beyond business partnership or casual friendship, allowing Williams to at least periodically take off the well-known mask and show the weaker person underneath. He had Hollywood's fastest mind. The man who, in a matter of seconds, could bring tears to the eyes of everyone in the room. But there was always something darker once the lights went down. In a recent perspective on their friendship spanning decades, Crystal disclosed, "People's perceptions of Robin were limited to what they saw on stage or film. I had the good fortune, and occasionally the heartbreak, to be aware of the others." At the age of 77, Crystal has now revealed the truth about Robin Williams, not to lessen the remarkable legacy of his buddy, but to help us better comprehend the nuanced, sensitive person whose hardships were as deep as his brilliance. Years after his death, Robin's voice still echoed Crystal's explanation that he was more than just a comic genius. He was a man with a mind that never gave him peace, fighting wars that most of us can't even begin to understand. Nevertheless, some of the most exquisite moments of laughing and connection that any of us will ever have come from that same restless mind. Instead of the sensationalized tell-all that frequently surfaces following a celebrity's passing, Crystal has offered a kind, considerate viewpoint on a friendship that enabled him to see past the public image to the true self. A viewpoint that aids in comprehending not only the character of Robin Williams, but also the price of the remarkable gifts he bestowed upon the world. Through the eyes of the buddy who knew Robin Williams the best, we examine his actual character today, a unique look at the complicated humanity of a man whose brightness and darkness were inseparable, and whose quest for equilibrium between them ultimately became too difficult to maintain beneath the glittering show. Billy Crystal's thoughts on Robin Williams go beyond the usual commemoration of a famous person. They provide light on a friendship that made it possible for both men to be perceived and comprehended in ways that were rarely possible given their public personalities. Crystal's unique ability to recognize the great performer who enthralled millions as well as the frail human being who suffered under the weight of his own amazing mind is what makes his viewpoint so precious. Crystal could see in Williams both the great gifts and the horrible difficulties that came with having a mind that worked at such incredible speed and sensitivity, as she herself, a fellow comic, managed the complicated terrain of fame while keeping an uncommonly grounded personal life. We saw the guy behind the performance as well as the Robin Williams that the public believed to be familiar via Crystal's eyes. A fuller truth that celebrates the darkness he fought within himself as much as the brightness he offered to others. The never-sleeping mind, their weight and their genius bound them together. Robin Williams wasn't the only person Billy Crystal knew. Few others could relate to him the way he did. Mutual respect, shared intelligence, and a unique capacity to see in one another both great gifts and the burdens those gifts occasionally carried were the cornerstones of their friendship, which lasted for more than 30 years. They were more than just pals. They were united by their shared burden, intelligence, and something that few others could ever manage. A former coworker who saw their relationship grow from professional appreciation to a strong personal bond described it as a brain that never shuts off. Billy was one of the few who could truly keep up with Robin's mentality, not just be overwhelmed or worn out by it, but actually interact with it. Anyone who witnessed them act together could see this mental synchrony. Whether it was during their rare but electrifying late-night talk show appearances, their iconic Oscar appearances, or their comedic relief charity events with Whoopi Goldberg. Whereas Williams' improvisational genius could leave others stunned, Crystal was able to build on his lightning-fast associations and create humorous exchanges that highlighted both men's talents while exposing their unique relationship. Robin's thoughts traveled at a speed that was nearly impossible for anyone to match. It wasn't just speed, even though God knows he was quick, Crystal explained. It was the connections he made, the leaps from one idea to another that no one else would see. Sometimes, if I was really on my game, I could not only follow where he was going, but meet him there. This mental connection went well beyond their public performances, and Crystal claims that their private conversations frequently took on the same rapid-fire quality, with ideas, observations, and jokes flowing between them at a pace that would have left most listeners caught up. Those moments, when we were completely in sync, were some of the most exhilarating experiences I've ever had. We spoke on the phone all the time, not just brief calls but lengthy emotional conversations, Crystal disclosed. Sometimes he would go manic, with ideas coming so quickly I could hardly keep up, but then his voice would change. But beneath this brilliant exterior was something deeper, a mutual understanding of the dual nature of such mental quickness. What Crystal learned from these conversations was that Williams' extraordinary mind, the same tool that produced his unmatched comedy, also created unique challenges. The brain that never shut off, that could make dazzling connections and inhabit multiple perspectives simultaneously, was also a brain that found stillness and peace elusive. Slow down, and the real conversation would begin. The Robin beyond the performance. He would talk about not being able to turn it off, not just the comedy, but the thinking, the constant awareness, and it was as if his mind was always working overtime, processing everything around him at this intense level. Crystal recalled that when the mania subsided and his voice changed, that's when the real stuff came out. While audiences witnessed the limitless energy and seemingly endless creativity, Crystal saw the toll that such intensity sometimes took. This realization of Williams' internal struggle enabled Crystal to see beyond the public persona to the more complex reality of his friend's experience. Everyone focused on the Ferrari part, the speed, the power, the performance, Crystal recalled. He once told me that his mind was like having a Ferrari engine but no brakes. However, he also described to me what it's like to have this amazing instrument that you can't always control, as well as the part when there are no brakes. Their mutual comprehension of the intricacies of comedy, how it may arise from both suffering and happiness, how it can act as both a form of expression and protection, strengthened their bond beyond what either man usually encountered with others in their line of work. Both had made a living by finding humor in the human situation, but they also understood how vulnerable it was to do so in a genuine way. It's difficult to explain to people outside of that world how comics understand each other, Crystal thought. We are aware that the same sensitivity that makes it possible to recognize the ridiculousness of life and discover the ideal observation that makes others laugh also makes you feel everything more strongly. Everything at full volume was sensed by Robin. That's what made him so vulnerable off stage and so wonderful on stage. Because of this mutual understanding, Williams was able to periodically put aside the performance-based nature of many of his other relationships. He didn't always have to be on with Crystal, didn't have to continue being the hilarious genius that others thought he was. He might just be himself. Contradictory, complex, and occasionally striving, but always genuine. The greatest gift you can give someone like Robin was permission not to perform, Crystal said. The Robin Williams show was what most people wanted when they were with him. They'd be disappointed if they didn't get the improvisations, the voices, the manic energy, but sometimes Robin needed space to just be a normal person, to not have to be brilliant for a while. Crystal's friendship allowed Williams to feel the rare relief of being recognized and accepted for who he is, not just his extraordinary talents or his public persona. Crystal once said, "He was the kindest man in the room and the saddest, capturing the duality that defined his friend." This acceptance allowed for a vulnerability and honesty that Williams rarely displayed to the outside world. The same mind that could bring so much joy to others was also the source of his own struggles. A bow. Yes. Van White. I'd like to buy a big bowel. Show me anus. Behind closed doors, the dinner ritual, and infrequent moments of silence. Complicated, sometimes troubled, but always profoundly human. I think that's why we connected so deeply. I saw both sides and valued them equally. Although Robin Williams, Billy Crystal, and Whoopi Goldberg gained widespread recognition as the original hosts of Comic Relief and raised over $80 million for homelessness causes through their televised charity specials, few were aware of the private ritual that followed these very public performances. These three comedy legends would have a quiet dinner together after the cameras stopped rolling and the audiences had left, creating a space where they could return to their private selves after their public personas. Robin, Billy, and Whoopi Goldberg would host Comic Relief every year, raising millions for the homeless. But what people didn't know was that after the cameras stopped rolling, they had a dinner with just the three of them. No press, no fans, explained a longtime producer of the charity events, and they fiercely guarded those dinners. These dinners, as Crystal has described them, are sacred spaces, rare moments when Williams can unwind from the extraordinary energy he had expended on stage and simply exist among friends who understand both the exhilaration and the cost of such performances. It was just the three of them, regardless of what Hollywood power players wanted to join or what network executives might have wanted to be included. There were happy times during those dinners, but there were also times when Robin would just stop talking. Crystal disclosed that he would look at the table, then look up and joke. However, during those brief pauses, when the well-known Robin Williams energy would momentarily fade, Crystal was able to get glimpses of his friend's inner life that few others ever saw. People assume Robin was always on, always performing, always manic, but that's not true. Crystal explained that these quieter moments weren't indications of depression or unhappiness, but rather windows into Williams's natural reflectiveness when he wasn't maintaining his public persona. When he felt safe, when he was with people he completely trusted, he could be quiet, thoughtful, even philosophical. The ritual of these private dinners provided a container for the three comedians to process the emotional experience of the charity events, which frequently involved direct contact with the homeless people they were working to help. Those were not sad moments, they were real moments. Moments when he could just be Robin, not Robin Williams, the performer everyone expected. What made those dinners special wasn't just that they were private. Goldberg said in a previous interview about their friendship, the conversations would flow naturally from humorous stories of backstage mishaps to serious discussions about the societal issues they'd encountered through their charitable work, said those familiar with the events. No one had to maintain any sort of consistency or image. We could just respond authentically to whatever came up. For Williams in particular, these dinners offered a unique opportunity to be seen beyond his comedic brilliance, to be valued for his compassion, his intellect, and his genuine concern for others. It was that we could be our whole selves, funny one minute, deadly serious the next, vulnerable after that. Although Robin was extremely well-read and deeply thoughtful about world events, history, and philosophy, Crystal recalled that he rarely displayed that side of himself publicly because he knew what people wanted and expected from him was comedy. Crystal has noted that some of Williams' most insightful observations about politics, human psychology, and social issues emerged during these post-show conversations. The depth of Williams' thinking frequently showed itself in the questions he would ask during these private dinners, questions that suggested his famous empathy extended far beyond what most people recognized. You would hear him make observations during those private dinners that were so profound, so insightful, that you would realize his mind wasn't just quick, it was deep. After one Comic Relief, we went to a homeless shelter in Chicago. Crystal recalled, Robin met this young woman. Williams was haunted by the suffering he saw through their charitable work, carrying those experiences with him long after the events ended. Could not have been older than 20 with her young son. Until lately, they had been living in their car. He listened intently to her story for about 15 minutes. Hours later, at dinner, he remarked abruptly, "Do you think she's going to be okay?" He hadn't forgotten her at all. That was Robin, bearing the suffering of others in addition to his own. Williams' attitude to his performances and philanthropic work was influenced by this empathy and connection that were so apparent in these intimate settings. According to Crystal, Williams's capacity to embody several personas with such conviction resulted from this same intense awareness of other people's experiences. He would merely gaze at the table before looking up and joking. Crystal reiterated the importance of these calmer times, saying, "But for that pause, we really saw him. I think those pauses were when he was processing everything he had observed, experienced, and taken in from his surroundings." Then, almost like a release valve for when it was all too much to bear, the joke would arrive. Throughout the years of comedic relief and beyond, these dinner customs persisted, fostering a camaraderie that went beyond their work partnerships. These personal relationships persisted even as their careers diverged, with Williams concentrating more on dramatic parts and Crystal juggling comedy, directing, and hosting. According to Crystal, those dinners changed as we did. Early on, they were more rock-based and focused on commemorating our recent successes. They grew deeper and more introspective over time. Robin's inquiries became increasingly philosophical. What brings individuals joy? Why is it so difficult to connect? What gives life purpose? These were no informal discussions. They were investigations into the topics that were most important to him. Through these personal rites, Crystal was able to learn about facets of Williams' personality that were mostly concealed from the general public: his introspection, his susceptibility, and his difficulty balancing his private life with his public persona. As Williams' personal problems grew in his latter years, this greater comprehension would prove crucial, since it enabled Crystal to spot indications of his friend's unhappiness that others might have overlooked. The gift of those dinners, those quiet moments together, was that they established a baseline, Crystal said. Not because I was particularly perceptive, but because I had witnessed Robin in those infrequent moments of genuineness when he didn't have to perform for anyone. I knew what he was like when he was being himself. Yes, no. As a result, I was able to identify when things started to change and when something wasn't quite right. Billy Crystal gained a unique understanding of the intricate relationship between Robin Williams' public performances and his private struggles as he got to know him better over the course of their decades-long friendship. No, the boy and I were in the shower. Yes, he was soaping him up and hosing him off while I watched. It wasn't fake. Billy Crystal described Robin's humor as a mask, a brilliant shimmering distraction from a constant inner war, explained a mutual friend who watched their relationship evolve over many years. What most observers saw as natural exuberance and limitless creativity, Crystal recognized as something more nuanced, a brilliant but ultimately protective response to deeper emotional currents. As Crystal explains, Williams' extraordinary comedic abilities served more than just entertaining others. They allowed him to connect with people without showing too much vulnerability, channel his mental energy in a productive way, and, perhaps most importantly, temporarily shift his own focus from internal struggles to external engagement. The brilliance was completely genuine, but it was also functional, keeping people at a certain distance, focused on the performance rather than the performer. Anyone feels better, but never quite himself, Crystal noted as someone who has seen the private suffering as well as the public genius. The paradox of Robin was that his greatest gift, the capacity to uplift others, came from something he was unable to achieve for himself. By seeing Williams' humor as a defensive mechanism as well as a sincere expression, Crystal was able to see his friend in a way that few others could. When you watched Robin perform, you were seeing something authentic but incomplete, Crystal explained. Whereas audiences and even casual acquaintances saw Williams' comedy as pure, spontaneous joy, Crystal recognized the more complex emotional landscape from which it emerged. The aspects he was at ease disclosing were transformed into shapes that made him happy instead of worried. The whole Robin, with all of his inquiries, sensitivities, and challenges, was far more cautious. Crystal claims that Williams' mind worked so quickly and sensitively that he needed some kind of filtration or channeling in order to function in typical social situations. This guardedness wasn't about deceit, but rather survival. His brain was constantly making these connections, seeing these patterns and absurdities that most people missed. If he had just spoken all those observations directly, people would have been overwhelmed, maybe even disturbed, Crystal said. Comedy was the ideal vehicle, a socially acceptable way to process his unique perceptions of the world that also created connection rather than isolation. However, those same views became talents when he turned them into comedy. As their friendship grew, Crystal became one of the few individuals with whom Williams could occasionally step aside from this protective performance. In their private conversations, especially the late-night phone calls that both men came to cherish, Williams was able to express thoughts and feelings that didn't fit within the confines of his public persona. Would call late at night, with no purpose, just to listen to a voice that didn't want anything from him. Crystal disclosed that these calls could begin with a joke, a query about the news, or a recent film he had seen, but they frequently ended up in a very different, more vulnerable place. The picture that emerged from these conversations was one of a man whose mind was both his greatest gift and his most difficult burden. It revealed the emotional complexity behind Williams's well-known performances, the sensitivity, the existential questioning, and occasionally the pain that his public brilliance both expressed and concealed. In the years after Williams' 2014 diagnosis of Parkinson's disease, later determined to have been a misdiagnosis of Lewy body dementia, the protective nature of his comedic persona became more and more obvious to Crystal. As Williams' symptoms worsened, impairing both his cognitive function and his ability to regulate his emotions, the mask became more difficult to maintain, a reality that Crystal believes caused his friend great distress. For someone whose entire identity and connection to the world had been built around that lightning-fast association, it was devastating to feel that slipping away. Crystal noticed changes in his friend that others might have missed precisely because he had seen beneath the performance to the person behind it. He was forgetting things, losing timing. He knew. I think that scared him more than anything. When Robin Williams was diagnosed with Lewy body dementia after his death, he knew when Williams' renowned improvisation started to take more work, when his conversational agility showed subtle signs of constraint, and when the mask that had served him so well throughout his life started to slip in ways that Williams couldn't control. But, according to a neurologist who has studied Williams's case, Billy claimed that even before the diagnosis, he had a feeling that something was amiss. Billy was seeing changes in Robin's performance abilities, as well as in the basic functioning of his mind, the process that had shaped his entire relationship with the outside world. Understanding Williams' final struggles requires an awareness of the growing disconnect between his internal experience and his capacity to express himself in the ways that had always defined him. According to Crystal, Williams' identity had been so deeply entwined with his exceptional mental abilities that their decline constituted an existential problem, as well as a health one. Crystal thought, I think he felt increasingly isolated, increasingly unable to be the person he had always been, both for himself and for others. The mask wasn't just his way of entertaining people, it was his way of being in the world, his way of processing his experience, and his way of connecting with others. This viewpoint provides a more nuanced understanding of Williams' struggles than simplistic narratives about depression or addiction. The progressive loss of the mental abilities that had not only defined Williams' career, but also his entire way of being in the world and relating to others, suggest a deeper problem. Even though those factors were real aspects of his experience, he could make anyone feel better, but never quite himself. I look back and it makes me laugh and smile. This observation encapsulates the poignant contradiction at the core of Williams' life, that the same brilliant mind that made millions of people happy also created obstacles that he himself couldn't always overcome, that the gifts he generously shared with the world occasionally came at a significant personal cost. Billy Crystal noticed subtle but significant changes in their communication patterns. In the months leading up to Robin Williams' death in August 2014, their regular phone conversations, which had long been a cornerstone of their friendship, started to shift in ways that worried him. We had phone calls, Bill, that sometimes lasted for hours and were just plain hilarious. The last connection, their last conversations, and their lasting legacy. In an interview, Billy said, there was a heaviness, like he wanted to say goodbye but couldn't find the words. I felt it. I just didn't know that was the last time I'd hear his voice. Billy never disclosed all the details of their final phone call, though the full significance of these changes would only become apparent in hindsight. The feeling that something was coming to an end, but not knowing exactly what or how to react, haunted Billy for a long time. Those close to both men said their last conversations included new undercurrents of struggle that William seemed unable to fully express, along with moments of their signature warmth and humor. The friend explained that their last few phone conversations had these pauses that hadn't been there before, and that Crystal had sensed his friend's growing difficulty finding the words he wanted. This was a particularly cruel challenge for someone whose verbal brilliance had always been his defining characteristic. Robin, who had always been able to fill any silence with something brilliant, would occasionally go quiet. What Crystal couldn't have known then, what no one knew, was that these changes reflected the progression of Lewy body dementia, a neurodegenerative disorder that was only diagnosed during William's autopsy. Mid-thought, Billy said he could almost hear him searching for connections that had always come so naturally before. Williams's genius was being subtly affected by the disease, which can cause cognitive fluctuations, visual hallucinations, and movement problems similar to Parkinson's disease, which he had been wrongly diagnosed with in life. He was losing his sense of timing and forgetting things. Crystal noted, "I think that scared him more than anything." This fear of losing the verbal agility and mental quickness that had been essential to William's career and identity is a key component in understanding his final struggles. For Williams, whose extraordinary mind had been both his greatest gift and occasionally his greatest challenge. The experience of that mind starting to fail him would have been especially devastating. Even though he didn't fully understand the reason behind these changes, Crystal's insight indicates that Williams was aware of them and deeply scared by their implications. Their final phone conversation, which Crystal has described but has never fully detailed out of respect for his friend's privacy, seems to have included elements of this awareness. A heaviness, a struggle for words, and perhaps an unspoken recognition that something fundamental was slipping away. I just didn't know that was the last time I'd hear his voice. There was a heaviness, as if he wanted to say goodbye but couldn't find the right words. Crystal recalled the ambiguity of this last exchange, where neither a straightforward farewell nor a typical conversation left her with unanswerable questions following William's passing. Crystal's reflections have consistently emphasized not only William's extraordinary talents but also his humanity, kindness, vulnerability, and constant efforts to bring joy to others, even while struggling himself. In the years since losing his friend, Crystal has worked to preserve William's legacy while also assisting the public in understanding the complex reality of the man behind the famous performances. As one longtime observer of their friendship put it, "That's not diminishing Robin's legacy, it's completing it, helping us understand the full humanity behind the performances we all treasured." The truth Billy Crystal finally told the world is this: Robin wasn't just funny, he was fragile. He was brilliant but burdened. He made the world better because he couldn't make himself feel that way. Crystal's perspective offers not only insight into William specifically, but also a broader recognition of the complex relationship between creativity, sensitivity, and suffering. Billy lost a friend. This more thorough understanding of Williams acknowledges both his unmatched gifts and the cost of those gifts. The truth is that the same extraordinary mind that produced such brilliant comedy also created unique challenges that eventually became unbearable. This last fact, that Billy Crystal saw and appreciated Williams not only for his renowned genius, but also for his full humanity, represents perhaps the greatest gift one friend could give another. The friend noticed that beneath the jokes, laughter, and genius, there was a man simply trying to survive. Crystal gave Williams the rare gift of being seen and accepted for his entire self, including the parts that didn't fit the public persona, in a world that frequently only wanted his performances. Now, by sharing his thoughts on their friendship, Crystal gives Williams' legacy a version of that gift, enabling us to see past the one-dimensional comic genius to the more nuanced, relatable, and human person behind the well-known performances. By acknowledging the very human context from which Williams' extraordinary talents arose, this deeper understanding enhances rather than lessens our appreciation of his extraordinary abilities. Robin was not only humorous, he was also fragile, brilliant but burdened, and he improved the world because he was unable to make himself feel that way. Crystal encapsulates the underlying truth about his friend in these few yet poignant words, a truth that respects Williams' strengths and weaknesses, his bright and dark sides, his remarkable individuality, and his core humanity.